is the 101st Constitution Amendment Act 2016. The 101st Constitution Amendment Act 2016, which talks about what is known as the GST and the establishment of what is known as the GST Council. This is the part that I'm going to take a little bit of a look and understanding at what we understand by GST and the GST Council, right? That's basically another constitutional body that we might just take a look at. Article 279A of the Constitution talks about GST Council, and Article 269A of the Constitution talks about Goods and Services Tax. And this is a part of the 101st Constitution Amendment Act 2016 that we have taken a look at these areas. In the Constitution, they have been introduced by these amendments made to the Constitution, right? So we'll take a understanding of this, right? Now, as for example, we have seen previously. Now, class, please take a look at this very clearly. We are trying to understand the intricacies of the goods and services taxes and how the goods and services taxes are divided between the union and the state, and what are the constitutional activities and provisions which work in the background of the goods and services taxes. That's basically what we are trying to, in a way, take an understanding of at this point. Okay. Now, once we try to focus upon what is known as the GST, as we have seen, for example, yesterday, please take a look at this class clearly. When we talk about GST right over here, the taxes which are kept by the government of India in its own pocket, the taxes which are kept by the government of India in its own pocket, and the taxes which are kept by the government of states in their own pocket. These are divided into the taxes which are given by the union list and the taxes which are given by the state list. Okay, taxes which are given by the union list and the taxes which are given by the state list. Now, as you know for a fact that the large chunk of taxes, class, please pay focus on this, that a large chunk of taxes go to the union list, go to the union, comma, as there are more tax intensive subjects with the union. Okay, a large chunk of taxes go to the union as there are more tax intensive subjects with the union. Union list has more tax intensive subjects is what basically we have understood yesterday. Now, another thing that, for example, what you can understand with regard to this particular perspective is that most of the taxes which are earned by the union are direct taxes, and most of the taxes which were earned by the state are indirect taxes, right? So if, for example, we take a look at the large chunk of taxes which are coming to the union, if we take a look at the large chunk of taxes which are coming to the union, most of these taxes are direct taxes, and the large chunk of taxes which are coming to the states, most of these taxes are indirect taxes. This is the kind of division which has been created between the union and the states in terms of understanding the tax division. Okay, so for example, let's say if I have to give a very simple understanding of the difference between direct taxes and indirect taxes. Direct taxes are directly payable by the Okay, so if I have to take a very simple understanding of a direct tax, the direct tax are payable directly by the person who's involved in that particular activity to the government of India. So let's say, for example, if I put up a little bit of a sense to this, if let's say if I am a person who's working in a company, if I am a person working in a company, okay, if this is a person who's working in a company, right, and if this company is giving him income, if the income is being given to this person, then this person out of this income will pay a tax to the government of India. This is what is known as a direct tax. Okay, so the person involved directly is paying the tax upon this entire. So you have, for example, let's call this person the tax deductible or tax subject. The person upon whom a tax liability is created is himself the one who's paying that tax, is what is we understand by a direct tax. Again, I'll repeat it. A person on whom a tax liability is created is himself paying a tax. This is what is known as a direct tax. Okay, a person upon whom a tax liability is being created is himself paying a tax. This is what is known as a direct tax. Clear? That's the first point we understand. Okay, and the second point that we understand is, for example, the indirect tax. Let's say, for example, if I take an understanding of the goods and services tax, the GST, let's say. Now, let's imagine, for example, that the GST is a tax which is payable by the customers of the product, right? It's a consumption tax. It is tax paid by the one who consume, right? It's a consumption tax. What basically we understand with this particular idea is that a person who is purchasing a book, let's say he goes to a bookstore, a person is going to a bookstore and he's purchasing a book, okay, and let's say, for example, he pays, let's say, 8% GST on the purchase of the book. Okay, this 8% GST is being paid by this person who is the final consumer or the customer of the product. Okay, now this 8% GST is paid to the bookstore, right? And the bookstore is supposed to collect these taxes, but it is the case that the bookstore has already paid this tax to the government of India, right? So the government of India has already extracted this tax from the bookstore. It is not waiting for the government, for the customer to give it the tax, and then the government of India gives a position to the bookstore, gives a charge to the bookstore to collect the tax from the customer and keep it with himself. You see, so what an indirect tax looks like, for example, is very simple. That when a bookstore is selling a book and you're paying a 8% GST on that book, you are paying the government, but indirectly, because the bookstore has already paid the 8% GST to that of the government. So, for example, if I manufacture an object and if I am going to provide that object to a wholesaler, I will have to start paying the government from the time of manufacture. 8% GST has already been paid by the manufacturer to the government if a tax has been paid by the government, by the manufacturer. Okay, so the manufacturer is already paying a 8% tax to the government upon anything which is manufacturing, and then he's going to bill that 8% to the wholesaler. The wholesaler will bill that 8% to the retailer will bill that 8% to the customer, and that is how these people start reclaiming the tax which they have already paid to the government of India. You see the point? That's what we understand by the concept of a GST class. Okay, or an indirect tax. So a direct tax is basically, or in fact, a kind of a good economic assumption that can work around here is that a direct tax is a tax which is imposed upon incomes. Okay, a direct tax is a tax which is imposed upon incomes, and an indirect tax is a tax which is imposed upon consumption, right? So you have two actors in an economic sphere. In every economic activity and in every economic ecosystem, you have two actors. two actors in every economic ecosystem. The first actor is the one who is, let's say for example, producer, manufacturer, service provider. What kind of a tax liability exists upon a producer or a manufacturer is known as a direct tax, okay? And what kind of a tax liability exists upon a consumer of a product is what is known as an indirect tax. So I've given you kind of an understanding over here to just in a framework sense understand the difference between a direct tax and an indirect tax. Okay, when we are trying to understand the concept of a direct tax, we are saying that a direct tax is based upon income. So for example, let's imagine a situation, class, focus upon this. If you imagine a situation like this, that if I am a producer, if I am producing goods, okay, and I am earning income by selling those goods, the charge of tax which I have to pay upon my income is a direct tax. You see the point over here. I am paying the tax to the government of India on the income that I have earned. So it is a tax which is made upon production, tax which is made upon income, tax which is made upon manufacturing, right? I am creating a value for the economy. I am selling that value in the economy to a people, and those people are going to now give me the return of that in value of currency. From that return I have received from the people who have purchased my material, I have to pay a tax to the government of India. The government of India is taxing the producers. These are the direct taxes. On the other hand, for example, if I'm not a producer, if I'm not a person who's paying anything to the government of India, I'm not producing an economic value, but I'm consuming an economic value. I am a consumer. I am the supply, the demand end of the economy. The tax which I am supposed to pay is known as an indirect tax. And this kind of a demand and supply formula is how the taxes are managed. The demand is represented by the indirect taxes and the supply is represented by the direct taxes. This is how basically the entire framework of taxation is constructed in the society, between the indirect taxes paid by the consumers and the direct taxes paid by the manufacturers and the producers. This is what basically we understand at the fundamental level to make a sense of this very clearly and very easily, right? Okay, now take a look at the point of contact. When we say, for instance, let's say, if I call something like this, most of the production taxes, what you can call most of the production slash manufacturing taxes are taken by the government of India. Because most of the production heavy and manufacturing heavy sectors, because most of the production heavy and manufacturing heavy sectors are with the union list, I can come to the conclusion that the direct taxes are mostly absorbed by the union, right? This is what basically I can take a look at. So most of the direct taxes, most of the taxes on production, most of the taxes on manufacturing, most of the taxes of what you can call services creation, etc., etc. If I'm on the supply side of the economy, I'm paying taxes to the union government. That is how Schedule 7 has categorized List 1 and List 2 of the Constitution, right? And the corollary to that is most of the indirect taxes, most of the indirect taxes which are taxes on consumption, most of the indirect taxes which are taxes on consumption are charged by the state governments. Most of the indirect taxes which are taxes on consumption are charged by the state governments, right? So indirect taxes go to the states. So when you're consuming, you are putting a tax upon indirect nature, and these are collected by the states, and most of the producer taxes are collected by the union. This is how you have to understand how the union and the state lists have been divided by the 7th schedule on this parameter. Production sector goes to the union and the consumption sector goes to the state, and the management of production and the taxes of production is supposed to be taken care of by the union, and the management of consumption and the the organization of consumption is to be taken care by the state, and that is how they kind of get their tax pools. And therefore the larger chunk of taxes which come out of this, they come to the Union of India, and then a smaller chunk of taxes out of this comes into the states. Basically that is the kind of division that I'm trying to make over here. Okay, now take a look at it. When we're talking about something like a goods and services tax, first of all you have to understand that this is a regime of what is known as indirect taxation. GST, the goods and services tax, is a regime of indirect taxation, which is also basically what we understand is that taxation on consumption. This is not a direct taxation which is taxation on production, but this is a taxation which is institutionalized as a taxation on consumption. This is what we have to understand, class. Are we getting a sense of it? This is an indirect tax, meaning the goods and services tax as we have instituted it by the 101st Constitution Amendment Act 2016 is a tax which has been imposed upon consumption, not on production, right? And therefore you have to understand that most amount of share of taxes in the GST, belongs to the states, right? It is a state's principal, what you can say, it is a principal revenue source for the states in their consolidated funds. Okay, it is a principal source of revenue for the states from their consolidated funds. Okay, so you have goods and services taxes, which is a regime of indirect taxation, which is taxation on consumption, and it is the principal revenue source for the consolidated fund of the states. This is the point that I'm trying to make over here.